Hello everyone, this is God of Politics, and welcome to a brand new video. But before we get started with this video, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. Those are both linked down in the description. But in today's video, I will be talking about the Senate and gubernatorial races in the state of Pennsylvania, taking a closer look at them, who I think is favored to win. Do I think there's going to be any sort of movement from where things are now? Looking at polls, are they going to be accurate in any sense? Just taking a general look at it, which you don't usually get from a regular prediction video for all of these races. So Pennsylvania has been one of the most closely watched states in the country when it comes to politics this year. We have two very, very important races here. Now, this Senate race could decide the majority, and this is also a very big state in general. So the gubernatorial race is going to be very, very interesting as well. It's going to be very impactful based on who wins. The legislature is currently Republican. It's likely to stay that way. Will Republicans get a trifecta for the first time since 2014, or will it continue with a Democratic governor after 2 terms of Tom Wolf? There's a lot of different scenarios that could happen, but I'll start off by talking about the Senate race. Now, of course, the Republican nominee is Dr. Oz, Mehmet Oz. He is the Republican candidate who won in a very, very close primary. He did have the Trump endorsement. Obviously, if we look at the polls, the candidates did not get very high in the polls. Nobody got anywhere near 50%. Oz was polling at 26.8%, only up 2 percentage points. If you look at the actual results, he won by 0.1 percentage points, less than 1,000 votes. Now, this was a super close primary. Eventually, Oz won it, but, it took days to count, and this was a very close primary. I think a lot of people did think Oz was going to win. I think I also predicted Oz to win as well, but I did not expect, I think most people didn't expect McCormick to do as well, and I don't think a lot of people expected that this race would be this close, but Oz is the candidate now for the Republicans, and as for the Democrats, pretty much everyone knows John Fetterman is the candidate. He obviously had a late surge going into it. He was leading by 31 points in the polls, polling at 43%. He actually ended up nearly at 60% of the vote, winning every single county, including Philadelphia. So he had a very, very strong primary performance. Now, if we look at the ratings, pretty much everyone rates it as toss-up. 538 rates it as lean Democrat for some reason. Inside Elections rates it as tilt-R. I think tilt-R is far more fair than lean Democrat, but that's a whole nother issue. So, looking at these endorsements, of course, this is going to be a very high-profile race. Trump endorsed Oz, and Biden endorsed Fetterman. You have Josh Shapiro endorsing Fetterman. You have Bob Casey, Elizabeth Warren. John Fetterman is, of course, known to be a more progressive figure. He's liked by people like Bernie Sanders, and, people like Oz tend to talk about that a lot. He's endorsed by a lot of state legislatures, a lot of organizations. Oz, you look at it, he's also endorsed by a lot of executive figures, a lot of representatives, some senators. He's endorsed by many state legislatures, many individuals, whatever it may be. They've all got a lot of endorsements because this is a race that is going to matter a lot. Now, looking at the polls, we can see here, it's likely going to be a repeat of what we saw in 2020, and probably to an even larger scale. Now, these polls are just not going to be accurate. I mean, a 17-point lead, I don't even know how you can manufacture that. I mean, a 14-point lead with likely voters after a 17-point lead with adults. This other poll shows an 11-point lead, a 6-point lead, a 9-point lead. I mean, these polls, I can tell you now, are just not going to be accurate. Now, what John Fetterman does have going for him is that he's polling nearly at 50% and above 50% in some of these polls, but he's not going to win by, a likely to safe margin if he even wins at all. I mean, we saw a very similar thing in 2020. The polls showed Biden winning in these Rust Belt states these Midwestern states by a lot more than what he did. He didn't win Michigan by as much as they said. He especially didn't win Wisconsin by as much as they said. And he didn't win Pennsylvania by as much as they said. And it's going to be a similar thing in this election. If Fetterman wins, which of course is, not necessarily guaranteed. I actually right now wouldn't say he's even favored. But if he does win, it's not going to be by anything close to what the polls say. Now, it is going to be very influential when it comes to the makeup of the Senate, because if we look at this here and we take this overall map, and we say the 5 key races, the 5 toss-up races, you could say, are Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire, right? Democrats need to win 4 out of the 5 of these here. They would need to win most likely New Hampshire. They'd have to win probably Nevada. They'd have to win maybe Georgia, and then they'd probably have to win Pennsylvania. They would have to win 4 of these races, right? If they lose Pennsylvania, if you give Pennsylvania to the Republicans, it becomes extremely difficult. Democrats need to win all 4 of these races. They need to win in New Hampshire, which is probably the easiest of these 4. They need to win in Georgia, which, a very marginal Biden state. You've got Raphael Warnock in here that's going to be good for Republicans. Arizona, sure, you have Blake Masters running for the Republicans, but again, this is a very marginal Biden state. Kelly only won by a few points back in 2020. And Nevada, which actually may be the most difficult of them all, given the quality of candidates that Republicans have and the fact that they're probably just going to have a good year in general. So Pennsylvania makes winning the Senate a lot easier. You say, give Democrats New Hampshire. Say they win it by a lean margin, which I think is a fair assessment at this point. I would probably put it at tilt Democrat, but I think lean Democrat is also fair. We can put it at tilt. You give Pennsylvania to the Democrats here. You say it's a tilt margin. Democrats now only need 2 of these 3 races, right? Say, Masters is really that bad of a candidate, and Democrats, are able to win that race. At this point, they only need to win 1 of Georgia and Nevada. Georgia, Herschel Walker's not the best candidate. They could win that race, or they could win in Nevada. It's a state Biden did win by a few points, which is not the case for Arizona and Georgia. So there's a lot of different scenarios and better scenarios for Democrats when you do give them the race in the state of Pennsylvania. And so that's going to be a very, very crucial race for the Democrats. Now, of course, Democrats are very likely to lose the House, so we're not speaking in terms of passing legislation or many, big impactful legislative accomplishments like you could argue, Build Back Better, which of course never ended up happening, but those kinds of things aren't going to be pushed for with a Republican House of Representatives, but you will still have things being pushed for, judges, a possible Supreme Court vacancy. There's a lot of things that still can be done with a Senate majority, and that is why it is so crucial for the Democratic Party. But that starts with Pennsylvania. They really need to win Pennsylvania if they want to win a Senate majority. It becomes extremely difficult, not impossible, but extremely difficult to do without the state of Pennsylvania. And so they're going to have to put a lot of resources, a lot of money into this race, and it's going to be difficult. 538 says they have a very good chance of winning. The Democrats' chances have gone up a lot recently. They were in 50-50 pretty much in early July into late July even. Now it's shot up to about a 2/3 chance, him winning by a 3% margin, and a lot of that has to do with these polls, which are just really not good polls. Do not look at these polls. They're not good. Do not trust them. They're going to be wrong. Similar thing here. Fetterman up 11 points in the polls is just not going to happen here. This is a state Biden won by 1 percentage point here. Fetterman's path to victory is doing better in these rural areas by a couple percentage points, doing better in the Pittsburgh area, doing better in places like Erie, maybe even doing better in some of these places like Lucerne County, where I don't believe Oz actually did very well in the primary. If we look at the primary map, we can see these are areas that I don't actually believe that Oz did do actually quite well here. Oz did well in these eastern Pennsylvania areas, whereas he didn't do as well in these western Pennsylvania areas where you're likely going to see strength by John Fetterman. He's going to have to do, say a couple percentage points better in these areas because he's not going to do as well as Biden did in the suburbs. Oz, I don't believe, is as bad of a candidate for the suburbs as Trump was. He may not crack 60% in Montgomery. He may, not crack 60% in Delaware County. And those would be very, very poor results. And, at that point, he probably wouldn't win. But assuming he does, 2% worse in these areas, maybe 3% worse, if he can do 1 to 2% better elsewhere, it will still give him a chance to win. Now, I'm skeptical of his ability to actually win more rural areas, but I think he does still have the ability to make it up by how much he will lose in the suburbs, which, people say 2%, 5%, different numbers, but he will do worse in the suburbs. It's just a question of how much better will he do in the rest of the state. Now, right now, I would say that this race is tilt Republican. However, this race is far from over. John Fetterman, of course, had a stroke. You know, he hasn't been having campaign events until I think he had his first one, you know, maybe a day ago or something. But he has not been on the campaign trail. That is certainly going to hurt him. You know, how will the debates go? There are a lot of unanswered questions that we have. This race is not going to be decided in August or September. This is a race that's going to go down to the wire, and that's when we're going to see what happens. And, you know, going into Election Day, I still expect this race to be a toss-up. But moving on to the gubernatorial election a little bit, this is actually a race for a while that most people thought Democrats would have a better chance in than the Senate race. But, you know, looking at it, many people actually say now that Doug Mastriano does have a good opportunity to win, and I don't think he's as bad of a candidate as some people did make him out to be. Yeah, this is where I mix it up with the Senate race. Mastriano did not do well in eastern Pennsylvania. That is where Lou Barletta did very well in this northeastern Pennsylvania, I should say, Lucerne County, you know, Lackawanna County, those kind of areas. But in the Senate race, those are areas where Oz did well, and he'll likely do well there in a general election. However, looking at the gubernatorial race now, as I showed you before, most people rated this race as a toss-up for the Senate race. For the gubernatorial race, most people are rating it as tilt to lean D, you know, somewhat. 538, even as it is likely Democrat, you know, 538 is obviously not going to do well if they're rating it as likely Democrat. But looking at this race, I actually think it could actually be very, very close. You can see here, of course, Bob Casey has a lot of endorsements for the primary. And then we look at this, you know, for the general election, we can see here Doug Mastriano did not have as many endorsements. He had the Trump endorsement, and he had a few other figures here. But looking at the general election, I actually think Mastriano has a pretty decent shot to win. This is going to be a good year for the Republican Party overall. Looking at the general election, we can see here that Doug Mastriano does have more endorsements than he does in the primary, but of course Josh Shapiro has a lot more, especially from the state and local officials. How much will that matter? Another question. But looking at these polls here, we can see that Josh Shapiro actually leads in some of these polls by less than Fetterman does. Could that be to Fetterman having more name recognition, you know, having a better message out to voters, having more money, whatever that may be? I don't actually think Fetterman will do much worse than Josh Shapiro does, if he even does worse at all. I think Mastriano is certainly a candidate that can win the gubernatorial race. Would I say he's favored? I don't know. I think I would put this race as a pure toss-up. It could really go either way. I might put it as even tilt Republican if I had to choose one way, because this is just going to be such a close race here. This, like the Senate race, is going to go down to the wire. It's not a race that's going to be decided in August or September. However, I think less people recognize how close this race might be compared to the Senate race. And I think that a lot of people will realize that over time, and I think in 2022, in November, I would not be surprised if Mastriano wins this race, whereas I think a lot of other people would be. But I think a lot of those people may not be as surprised if Oz wins. I think a lot of people are actually predicting for Oz to win and Shapiro to win. I want to say I doubt that they would go separate ways. I don't think they'll vote that differently from one another. I think that I would have to say the most likely scenario as of now is both going Republican, but certainly multiple scenarios could happen, and I'll continue to cover those scenarios because this is one of the most interesting races in the country. There's a lot of moving parts, and it is a very, very interesting race. So thank you all for watching this video. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. Those are both linked down in the description. But again, guys, thank you all for watching this video, and I'll see you guys later.